Welcome, I'm Kasia Madeira. It is day 11 of the US-Israel war with Iran. Over the next 10 minutes or so, we'll bring you our daily briefing on all you need to know and the key updates on the conflict. The most fighters, the most bombers, the most strikes. That's the warning from the US Secretary of Defence, who promised today will be the most intense day of strikes on Iran, while repeating President Trump's position that America is winning the war. However, a very different view from Tehran. Senior military officials claim it will be Iran, not the US, who will determine how the war will end. We'll bring you analysis of how the conflict is being covered inside Iran. Well, Tehran endures another night of punishing US and Israeli airstrikes. We'll hear from people on the ground in the capital. President Trump warns he'll hit Iran 20 times harder if they continue to prevent oil leaving the Strait of Hormuz. Tehran responds saying it'll either be a strait of peace or a strait of defeat and suffering. Well, all this as the British warship HMS Dragon finally begins its journey to the eastern Mediterranean, tasked with protecting UK military bases in Cyprus. A second Royal Navy ship is also being prepared for a possible Middle East mission. So we begin with the latest from the US, where Secretary of Defence Pete Hegseth threatened to ramp up strikes and warned of the most intense day of the war so far. He also repeated that America is winning, following President Trump's claim that the war will be over very quickly. Here's some of his speech at the Pentagon.
Today will be, yet again, our most intense day of strikes inside Iran. The most fighters, the most bombers, the most strikes. Intelligence more refined and better than ever.
North America editor Sarah Smith joins us from Washington. So, Sarah, just tell us more about just how the Trump administration is framing this war.
Well, at this very moment, the White House press secretary is giving a briefing in the building just behind me. And she started by saying that President Trump used this as a tremendous success so far, boasting about the way in which they have decimated Iran's military capability, reduced by 90% their ability to send ballistic missiles at targets in the region, how much of the Iranian Navy they have destroyed, focusing very much on those military targets and saying that they are ahead of schedule in what they hope to achieve. At the same time, they don't seem to be any nearer the political objectives that the president set near the beginning of this when he was talking about regime change, which clearly hasn't happened, and demanding the unconditional surrender of the Iranian ruling regime, which also is not in sight. So what we're seeing now inside the administration is them worrying about the price of oil rising if this looks like it's going to be a long and protracted war, and sending signals not only that they're doing very well with what they hope to achieve, but that this will be over quite soon, possibly within a week, President Trump was speculating last night. Now, that's a message that is meant to calm the markets. It's not one necessarily that they want Iran to take to say that there's going to be a let-up soon. So that's why they're saying they're going to be hitting them harder than ever before. But I think what's becoming very clear is that there is a political calculation to be made here in Washington about at what point the possibility of rising oil prices and other American public opinion discontent about this war becomes politically damaging for Donald Trump in a year when we will have midterm elections in November, and whether he needs to declare victory and claim that he has achieved everything he wanted to in Iran, maybe sooner than he might have done otherwise, simply because of the political pain he could suffer inside the United States.
Sarah, as always, many thanks. Sarah Smith there joining us from the White House. Well, unsurprisingly, there's a rather different view from inside Iran of just how this war is unfolding. The regime rejects the view that the US has achieved its military aims and insists Iran will be the one to decide when the war is over. People on the BBC News YouTube channel are commenting that both Iran and the US want to give the impression that things are going to plan. Panyama Sadeghi is a reporter from BBC Monitoring who studies just how the war is being covered inside Iran. She explains how the regime is framing the war.
Iran is portraying in a much more different narrative of the war, maintaining that it's actually winning, maintaining its focus on its strikes across the region, on US assets and regional countries, and actually portraying its way of making sure that it can be in this war for a long time by maintaining its food supplies and petrol supplies. It also is portraying support for the government by actually showing pro-government rallies in Iran every day. The Iranian government officials and commanders have rejected President Trump's narrative that the war is over and they have won. Iran says that the US can't just have the exit that it wants and that Iran wants revenge. Also, importantly, Iranian officials have said that they have some preconditions for ending the war. One is having guarantees that the US won't do this again, and also taking responsibility for the war. They have maintained that their only focus is on their defense currently rather than talks with the US, having rejected any threats from the Trump administration about the Strait of Hormuz and oil disruptions. They have said that these threats are hollow and that they are actually just defending themselves and the US started this war. The big picture to all of this is that Iran needs to project power both internally and externally. Internally, it wants to make sure that protests are not reignited and that calm remains and they can maintain their control on power. Externally, they want to do enough damage so that the US comes back to the negotiating table and gives guarantees of this not happening again.
So we heard there about the security of the Strait of Hormuz, a vital sea passage where around a fifth of the world's oil supply passes through. President Trump threatened to bring death, fire and fury to Iran if it continues to block oil exports. Meanwhile, a top Iranian official warned the passage will either be a strait of peace and prosperity or a strait of defeat and suffering. Justin Crump is a military veteran and intelligence analyst. He explained why protecting ships in the strait represents a massive challenge for any military force.
You have a hostile shore all the way down the Gulf with, who knows how many people from the IRGC, Navy and others with a plethora of means at their disposal to make that the passage of the strait very difficult. And for US Navy warships in that environment, it could be a pretty punchy fight. So you wouldn't want to just send a US Navy vessel through. It would run a number of risks on its own. It's going to need support. We need a lot of support from the air. So you start saying, well, we need to suppress the far side of the strait. We need to push back the threats. Well, some of the drones have a 2,000-mile range. So you need to clear any ability of drones for 2,000 miles to come in. Okay, you could intercept them on the way out. So you've now got an air bubble, further away from the strait. You've then got a suppression bubble on the far side of the strait from the air. And eventually you say, well, we need to get troops on the far bank to secure that and push back the ability of the Iranians to launch small boats anywhere, to put mines in the water. This is a tremendously difficult and risky military operation for the US Navy. It is not going to be a simple matter of forcing the strait against significant IRGC opposition if Iran wants to do that. At the moment, they're attacking about a ship a day to make the point that the strait is closed. They have stronger options. And it would take a lot of fighting to actually guarantee the strait open if that was done purely tomorrow by the US Navy.
Well, beyond the Strait of Hormuz, America is threatening to intensify its military campaign with more bombers and more strikes, and that would inevitably impact people on the ground. BBC Persian has gathered messages from Iranians inside the country. They were sent via text messages. They've been voiced up by our colleagues.
I was in total darkness last night. The electricity went out and I had no idea what was happening. I'm dying from a headache now. They hit hard last night. All you can see in our house are cracks in the walls.
There was a strange white light in the sky last night. It seemed different from the nights before. But even if it takes a few weeks now, it is still better than spending a lifetime living with this system.
I'm getting tired of this situation. The whole war is overwhelming. Some scenarios for the future and for the people of Iran are truly frightening.
Some rarely heard voices from the people in Iran. Now, just a couple of other developments to bring you today. While the US projects an upbeat view of how the war is unfolding, Iran continues to retaliate by attacking its neighbours. Israel, Qatar and the UAE have all reported new missile strikes on their territory as Tehran threatens that it will take an eye-for-an-eye approach. Lebanon's government says almost 760,000 people have been registered as displaced since the outbreak of a new war between Israel and the Iranian-backed group Hezbollah. The UN says more than 100,000 have been displaced in a single day. Israel began a heavy bombardment after Hezbollah sent missiles and drones into Israel in support of Iran. And HMS Dragon, a British warship, has finally set off for the eastern Mediterranean, loaded with ammunition and supplies ready to protect UK military assets in Cyprus. It comes after a drone struck the runway at RAF Akrotiri base, causing what the Ministry of Defence described as minimal damage. So 11 days into the US-Israel war with Iran, where do things stand for the region and for the wider world? Well, some of the questions people are searching for on the BBC's social channels include, is the war about to end? And who is actually winning it? Well, our chief international correspondent, Lise Doucette, is with me. And Lise, as we've been hearing there, people are talking about whether, when this war will end. Iran seems weakened potentially, but is much more volatile. Where does this leave the region in the wider context?
Well, Kesha, as we've been reporting since the very start of this war, countries in the region, including Arab Gulf leaders like Oman and Qatar, who had played such key roles in the past mediating in this crisis, they've now been furious over what they say is Iran's reckless behavior in attacking not just the US military assets in the region, as Iran had threatened to do, but attacking critical infrastructure, even tourism. One senior official in the Gulf said to me last week that they are so furious that the rupture with Iran would take decades to heal. And that matters because it's only been in recent years that there's been this cautious rapprochement between Iran and its Arab neighbors. But when they now hear the US Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth vowing to destroy Iran's military and industrial base, people are likening it to Germany after the Second World War, leaders in the region think twice. Yes, after the missiles launched on their territory, they want Iran's ballistic missile program to be degraded, if not destroyed. But if Iran's industrial base and its critical infrastructure is destroyed, that creates the conditions for crisis and possible chaos. And that's too big a risk for such a vast country in such a volatile region. Last week when I asked officials, are you trying to find a way out? Are you on the telephone to Washington? They said, no, we're just defending ourselves. But Kesha, now we're hearing that there is more engagement, more talk of diplomacy. President Trump keeps saying, oh, the Iranians really want to talk. And the Iranian leaders say, we're not ready to talk. But as we heard earlier, they want to make sure that everyone, including leaders in the region, that if they think about going to war against Iran again, there's a huge price to pay.
Lise, as always, thank you so much for just talking us through that and putting it into the bigger picture context. Thank you so much. Lise Doucette, our chief international correspondent. Thank you, as always. Well, whether you're joining us on YouTube, TikTok, Sounds, radio or TV, thanks so much for your time. We're going to be back at the same time tomorrow with the Iran War Today. Bye-bye.